Czechast, a podcast in English about Czech and Moravian society, history, culture and economy.
Hello, this is Czechast, where we explore the people, places and stories that make the Czech Republic unique. I'm Vít Pohanka, your host. The idea for this episode came to me a few months ago when I spoke with Karina Giffard, a Czech woman who found a new home in Britain. Even after decades of living in the UK, she described how her English friends and neighbours saw her.
The strange lady who goes picking mushrooms and stinging nettles and things which English people generally don't do.
Forget the stinging nettles for a moment. The first thing Karina mentions as something that makes her distinctly different from her neighbours is her tendency to pick mushrooms. This is an activity still largely viewed in Britain as risky and potentially deadly. James Wood, founder and owner of Totally Wild, a small business that teaches foraging, that is collecting wild food resources from nature, confirms this cultural perspective.
Everyone obviously sees them, but I think because we've not done it, it's not pastime, it's not normal for us to go out and pick these things. We've actually ended up instilling a fear into the next generation just because we're not confident. So let's say one of our children goes out and looks like they're going to pick a mushroom, we would be so worried that it's going to be deadly toxic that we'd try and put fear into them about it. Don't touch that, it could kill you, yeah. And then that obviously makes them scared of picking mushrooms. It has a further knock-on effect of them teaching their kids and all of that. It puts fear into learning. But I really do see a change in this now. Obviously, we're running courses on it, so we're teaching people, which has a knock-on effect of them teaching their children the stuff that we teach them. But there's many more people interested. I think forest school is becoming really quite prevalent in the UK now, and that's having a big impact on younger people learning about nature. Obviously, foraging and wild food and mushrooms are included in that.
Karina Giffard and most other Czechs, Moravians and Silesians certainly don't strike me as people born with a death wish or risk takers. Yet, as anthropologist Karel Šima from Charles University explains,
podle výzkumu odborníků, kteří se zabývají využíváním lesů,
according to research by experts studying forest use, up to 75% of the Czech population has some experience with mushroom picking.
Zkušenost se sběrem hub.
Why is that? What does such a popular pastime as mushroom picking tell us about Czech society, its history and its place in Europe? I decided to find out. So sit back, relax and join me as we delve into this fascinating aspect of Czech culture.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.
There is nothing like a leisurely stroll through a summer forest. While you can go mushroom picking all year round, it is mostly in summer and early autumn that millions of people in Czechia wander through forests, usually carrying baskets or bags, small knives in their hands, and their eyes fixed on the ground, especially in areas where the undergrowth is thick, searching for mushrooms, both small and large. Jan Kozák, a Czech dissident, poet and performer, even wrote a poem about this beloved Czech pastime.
The English invented Hyde Park. Czechs are excellent mushroom pickers. The Japanese have the fastest strains. Czechs are excellent mushroom pickers. The Americans invented rock and roll. Czechs are excellent mushroom pickers.
And so the poem continues, explaining what other nations have contributed to the world and highlighting that Czechs are exceptional mushroom pickers. To be fair, mushroom picking is far from being solely a Czech specialty. However, this nation truly has a unique approach to it. To learn more, I visited an expert at Charles University in Prague.
Tak, moje jméno je Karel Šíma a jsem historik a antropolog a působím na Filozofické fakultě.
My name is Karel Šíma and I am a historian and anthropologist working at the Faculty of Arts and the Siri Institute. My interest in mushroom picking stems, as is often the case, from a personal passion that eventually intertwined with my academic interests. As a child, I went mushroom picking with my parents and grandparents. Later, I continued the tradition with my own children and joined the Czech Mycological Society. That's when I realized how significant this phenomenon is in Czech culture and how it can even address contemporary issues such as environmental changes. Mushroom picking might help us rethink how we perceive our society and its resilience.
Podle výzkumů odborníků, kteří se zabývají využíváním lesů, tak až 75% obyvatel České republiky má nějakou zkušenost se sběrem hub.
According to research by experts studying forest use, up to 75% of the Czech population has some experience with mushroom picking, which is remarkable even on an international scale. In anthropology, there is a distinction between so-called mycophilic cultures, those that love mushrooms, and mycophobic cultures, those that are afraid of them. Czech culture has traditionally been among the mycophilic ones. This distinction was introduced by ethnomycologists, the Wassons, who in the 1950s wrote a foundational work on ethnomycology, in which they recognized significant cultural differences in how mushrooms are perceived.
Kulturní rozdíly v tom, jak vnímáme houby.
Now, let's take a little detour from the Czech lands. The story of this American mushroom expert is really fascinating and worth a bit of explanation.
Robert Gordon Wasson byl americký finančník, který si ve 20. letech vzal ruskou emigrantu.
Robert Gordon Wasson was an American financier who married a Russian emigre, Valentina Pavlovna, in the 1920s. After their wedding, they went on their honeymoon to the Catskill Mountains in New York State. During the honeymoon, Valentina spent entire days running through the forest, collecting mushrooms, and in the evenings she prepared various dishes from them. This was an absolute shock for Robert, and according to legend, he even refused to eat the meals his new wife had prepared because he was disgusted by mushrooms.
A ten silný emoční zážitek je potom dovedl k tomu, že začali zkoumat.
However, this intense emotional experience led them to begin exploring mushrooms across different cultures. Eventually, Wasson delved into the study of psychedelic mushrooms. In the late 1950s, he researched them in Mexico and published an article in Time magazine in 1957, which became a milestone in the interest in psychedelics and heralded the cultural wave of the 1960s.
Té psychedelické vlny 60. let.
Let's return to Europe. Can we pinpoint where the border lies between nations that are fond of mushroom picking, mycophilic, and those that are not, or mycophobic?
Podle těch výzkumů mykofobické národy jsou především spojené se severozápadní Evropou.
According to research, mycophobic nations are primarily located in northwestern Europe, including Scandinavia and English-speaking countries. As you move east and south, this fear of mushrooms gradually diminishes. For example, in German-speaking regions, mushroom picking is common in southern areas like Bavaria and Switzerland, whereas northern Germany tends to be less mycophilic. Mushrooms are also quite common in Italian and French cuisine, but in these countries they are part of a higher culture, whereas in Central and Eastern Europe, which stretches roughly from the Czech lands to Russia, mushroom picking has traditionally been associated with folk customs, traditional cuisine, and similar practices. Transition cases, such as Finland, are particularly interesting. It is said that the western part of Finland is more influenced by the Scandinavian distance from mushrooms, while the eastern part is mycophilic under the influence of Russian culture.
Je mykofilická pod vlivem ruské kultury.
And now another detour, this time to Great Britain.
Hi, it's James Wood here from Totally Wild UK. I'm just out taking my dog for a walk and I've seen these in the grass, and actually I spotted these from a distance. So before I ever saw the mushroom, I spotted...
James Wood is the founder and owner of Totally Wild, a small business that teaches foraging, collecting wild food resources from nature. I called him as an expert to understand why, despite his efforts to show that most mushrooms are edible and even delicious, the British remain overwhelmingly mycophobic.
Mushrooms are inevitably involved in pretty much every course that we deliver, whether it's in spring, summer, or autumn. Pretty much, as you might know yourself, there's stuff to be found at all time of year. I would say in the UK, foraging for mushrooms is not a pastime. You've said here about 7% of the population in the Czech would be happy at going out and foraging mushrooms. I would say in the UK we're somewhere possibly less than 5% of people would be happy to go out and pick mushrooms. Everyone obviously sees them, but I think as we've not done it, it's not pastime, it's not normal for us to go out and pick these things. We've actually ended up instilling a fear into the next generation just because we're not confident. So let's say one of our children goes out and looks like they're going to pick a mushroom, we would be so worried that it's going to be deadly toxic that we'd try and put fear into them about it. Don't touch that, it could kill you, yeah. And then that obviously makes them scared of picking mushrooms. It has a further knock-on effect of them teaching their kids and all of that. It puts fear into learning. But I really do see a change in this now. Obviously, we're running courses on it, so we're teaching people, which has a knock-on effect of them teaching their children the stuff that we teach them. But there's many more people interested. I think forest school is becoming really quite prevalent in the UK now, and that's having a big impact on younger people learning about nature. Obviously, foraging and wild food and mushrooms are included in that. I would definitely say that I encounter a fear of people in the UK around mushrooms and a massive worry around picking poisonous varieties. So whenever we run our events at the start of them, we always go around the group and we ask why people are there, what they're hoping to get out of the day, stuff like that. And I would say nearly every person, I'd say at least 90% of people on the courses would say, I'm really interested in mushrooms, but I have no confidence whatsoever in picking them. And I don't want to be, this is the fear, I don't want to be that person that picks a mushroom and kills his partner and ends up a headline in a newspaper because there was one really key difference between a toxic mushroom and an edible one. And I didn't even know there was a difference, never mind know how to identify the difference.
So, what causes this split among European nations in their relationship with mushrooms? I asked Karel Šíma from Charles University again.
Tady to tradiční rozdělení samozřejmě je možné těžko vysvětlit, má velmi hluboké kořeny.
This traditional division, of course, is difficult to explain. It has very deep roots, especially since it pertains to folklore or folk culture. The oldest roots are hard to trace.
Ale někteří autoři vlastně poukazují na to, že to souvisí.
However, some authors point out that it is connected to modern economies and industrialization. In English-speaking countries, for example, industrialization occurred earlier, accompanied by massive deforestation. Consequently, many species of mushrooms disappeared because the mushrooms we are used to collecting are predominantly mycorrhizal, meaning they live in symbiosis with trees.
Symbióze se stromy.
However, the issue seems even more complicated. While working in Poland, for example, a neighbor of Czechia, I observed people picking mushrooms in an organized way and delivering them to trucks to be hauled to markets both in Poland and abroad. You wouldn't see anything like that in Czechia. Karel Šíma explains.
Jsou tam rozdíly, určitě. To, co jste viděl v Polsku, tak to je známo. Dokonce existuje několik studií o tom, jakým způsobem, jak...
There are differences. Certainly what you observed in Poland is well known. In fact, there are several studies on how mushrooms are a significant source of income for the local population there.
A myslím si, že ten rozdíl vůči české společnosti je způsobený především tím, jak se během 20.
I think the main difference in approaches to mushroom picking developed in the 20th century, when leisurely, rather than purely economic mushroom picking began to gain popularity in Czechia. Here we need to go back to the roots of modern amateur mycology, which is associated with the name František Smotlacha. At the beginning of the 20th century, he started organizing mushroom picking as a modern activity for modern people.
Jako volnočasovou aktivitu, která je spojená s hygienou, je spojená se zdravím.
He reinvented it as a leisure activity connected with hygiene, health, but also aesthetic experience, essentially recreation, and he was very successful in these efforts. He founded the Czech Mycological Society and, in the 1920s, the journal Czechoslovak Mushroom Pickers. Through his educational efforts, he managed to turn mushroom picking into a pleasant and beneficial pastime. Naturally, this is also linked to the further development of professional and scientific mycology, which was very successful in the Czech lands. It could be said that in the second half of the 20th century, Czech mycologists were among the most successful in the world in this relatively small natural science field.
V tomhletom poměrně malém přírodovědném oboru.
To pick mushrooms, you often have to go into forests that are privately owned. In a way, this means trespassing. However, this has never stopped the Czechs from enjoying this type of foraging.
Máme poměrně dlouhou tradici otevírání lesa pro takzvanou tu neproduktivní využívání lesa.
We have a relatively long tradition of opening up forests for so-called non-productive uses. Whether it's collecting small branches of dry wood or firewood or gathering forest fruits, these activities have gradually been made accessible to the general public, even in private forests. Since the 19th century, there has been legislation addressing this, which was gradually specified over time. After World War II, it was clearly established, although the nationalisation of forests brought some changes. But even today, it remains the case that forests, including private ones, must be accessible in some way and available to the general public for small-scale forest gathering activities.
K tomu drobnému lesnímu sběru.
To learn more about mushrooms, I visited Jan Holec, the head of the mycological department at the Czech National Museum. He led me to a special vault in a modern building in Horní Počernice on the outskirts of Prague. Here, he and his colleagues gather, store, describe and monitor countless samples of mushrooms in a strictly controlled environment with stable temperatures and the right degree of humidity. They keep the specimens in special envelopes.
Kolik takových, já nechci říkat vzorků, kolik takových... How many such envelopes you just showed me have you got here, if I put it like that? Can you estimate it just roughly?
V celém našem oddělení je to několik set tisíc. My to ani přesně nevíme.
In our entire department, it's several hundred thousand. We don't know the exact number because we are still creating the digital records. However, we estimate it to be around 600,000. This collection dates back to 1818 when the museum was founded.
Takže jsou tady i So, you have samples, collections from the year 1818?
Jsou to tyhle staré sběry. Tam bohužel často ten způsob...
Yes, we have those old collections too. However, their drying methods were often poorer, so it's sometimes difficult to extract DNA from them. But today we've mastered the process and there's no problem preserving them in good conditions.
Naprosto laický dotaz. Proč? Proč je to potřeba? Now, a completely layman's question. Why is all this useful?
Ale je to vlastně doklad v čase a prostoru, že ta houba se tam vyskytla. Protože
As I mentioned, it's essentially a record in time and space proving that the fungus existed in that location. Scientific mycology is based on these pillars. It's similar to Venice, which stands on wooden piles. Each of our collections is like a pile supporting the entire structure of scientific mycology.
When you mentioned roughly 600,000 such samples that you have,
we call them items.
Sorry, so when you mentioned 600,000 items, can you estimate at least approximately how many species do they represent?
To víme docela přesně, protože už máme veškerá ta jména v databázi. V té databázi máme...
We know that quite accurately because all the names are already in our database. There are 30,000 species, or rather 30,000 names. Some of them are synonyms. It's quite a significant portion of the world's fungi because it's currently estimated that about 150,000 species of fungi have been described worldwide using scientific methods, with their holotypes and so on. We have approximately 1/5 of the world's fungi here, which roughly corresponds to Europe, where most of our collections come from, though we also have some from America and Asia. But the core is Europe.
A dá se říct na českém území zhruba, kolik se vyskytuje druhů? And again, can you tell me just roughly how many species of fungi are found in the Czech Republic?
Tam to víme s větší jistotou, hlavně u těch velkých hub, to znamená těch, co tvoří plodnice.
We know this with more certainty, especially for large fungi that produce fruiting bodies. It's estimated that there are about 5,000 species. If we include microfungi, such as molds and parasites, the number could range between 10,000 and 20,000 species.
Rozhodně před 10 000, možná 10-20 000.
I will return to Jan Holec later. During my research on mushrooms, I discovered that the Czech Academy of Sciences employs another expert, Jan Borovička. According to the official website of the Institute of Geology, he studies the interaction between micromycets, understand large mushrooms, and the subsoil. What does that actually mean? Could someone translate it for us, mere lay people? I had the honor of asking Jan Borovička himself.
No, ono se to dá určitě přeložit relativně jednoduše. Vzhledem k tomu, že Češi hodně sbírají houby, tak vědí nebo alespoň tuší.
Well, it can certainly be translated relatively easily. And given that Czechs are avid mushroom pickers, they know, or at least suspect, that some of the fruiting bodies they collect might hypothetically contain higher amounts of substances that are potentially health-risking. This was particularly discussed in connection with the Chernobyl nuclear reactor accident, where mushrooms accumulated a significant amount of radioactivity. It's interesting that the fruiting bodies we collect can accumulate various types of trace elements, and this accumulation is species dependent. In other words, different species of mushrooms have different capacities to accumulate specific elements.
To znamená, různé druhy hub mají různou schopnost akumulovat ten či onen prvek.
Čemu to slouží? Abych se zeptal takhle.
But again, why is this information about mushrooms useful?
V principu je to otázka základního výzkumu, to znamená, zkoumáme houby a jejich vlastnosti, aby jsme se dozvěděli.
In principle, it's a matter of basic research, meaning we study mushrooms and their properties to learn more about nature and how it functions. However, it also has some practical significance. Specifically, when it comes to health risk elements, there is information relevant for mushroom consumers. I can illustrate this with a study we published about 5 years ago. There is a mushroom called Boletus pulverulentus, which for many years we recommended as edible, but it turned out to contain a relatively large amount of arsenic. We studied these mushrooms from various locations across the Czech Republic, and as most people know, arsenic is a health risk element. The amount of arsenic in this mushroom is so significant that it could potentially cause health problems. So the conclusion of the study was that future mushroom field guides should include this information for mushroom foragers, so that they can decide whether they want to risk arsenic toxicity or not. The second aspect is that if a particular mushroom has the property of accumulating a specific element in an extreme way, it suggests that this might have some biological significance. Additionally, it hypothetically opens up the possibility of applying this mushroom's property in some biotechnological process in the future.
Aplikovat v nějakém biotechnologickém procesu.
Says Jan Borovička from the Institute of Geology of the Czech Academy of Sciences. For most Czechs, however, mushroom picking remains a form of recreation and sometimes even a competition. Who can find the most mushrooms in a certain period of time? Or who will discover the biggest mushroom of all? Media and social networks often fuel this competitive spirit around mushroom picking. Jan Holec, the chief mycologist at the Czech National Museum, isn't pleased with what he sees and hears.
Už mi to připadá přehnané, protože v Čechách je to houbaření tak populární, že vlastně i bez té mediální masáže ten člověk, když ty houby chce...
I find it excessive. Mushroom hunting is so popular in the Czech Republic that people who want to find mushrooms will go to the forest without any media hype. And what do they expect from the forest? They expect silence, peace, and an intense experience. They expect to find something. The media frenzy, which unnecessarily drives crowds to the forests, doesn't fit into this for me. I mean, for example, the map on the website of the Czech Hydrometeorological Institute, the mushroom growth map. I really dislike it. I'm saying this quite frankly. The institute is respectable and helps tremendously, but this is a highly speculative matter because we still don't fully understand the factors that enable mushrooms to grow. Deriving it merely from soil moisture and other parameters and then marking green areas on a map, which attract masses of people to those spots, seems over the top to me.
A jak to dnešní takovéto drsné houbaření vypadá? Vypadá to tak, že se lidi svolají na sociálních sítích ve velkých tlupách.
And what does today's crude version of mushroom hunting look like? It looks like people organizing themselves on social media in large groups. They block forest roads. There's nowhere to park. In some cases, even forest workers couldn't get out because the roads were blocked. Then, when everyone heads into the forest, they disturb each other. I experienced this myself a few years ago when I went to the Brdy forests. Or actually, you can experience it every year. There are groups of people shouting to communicate in the forest, and you lose that intimate experience of genuine mushroom hunting.
Musíme si uvědomit, že ve většině států Evropy jsou různé regulace sběru hub.
We have to realize that in most European countries, mushroom picking is regulated in various ways, by weight, by the number of species, or by specific seasons. In some cases, you're only allowed to pick mushrooms on odd or even days. This is common in Switzerland and Italy. I hope we never lose the beautiful freedom of mushroom hunting, where we can freely go into the forest and enjoy it along with the mushrooms. So, people who wouldn't normally go out are unnecessarily encouraged by these media campaigns to head into the forests, and I think it's over the top.
A připadá mi to už přemrštěné.
Jan Holec, chief mycologist at the Czech National Museum. As I discovered, he is far from the first Czech to complain about the overcrowding of Czech forests during mushroom picking season. Karel Čapek, arguably the most famous Czech writer, expressed similar concerns nearly a century ago in a special article.
A mushroom picker really dislikes the mushroom picker who was in the forest before them. Someone's already been here, the picker mutters misanthropically as soon as they step into the underbrush, wishing at that moment that fewer people were born into the world. But as I say, it's not just about this aspect of things. Worse still is that most people searching for mushrooms enter the forest with the idea that it's not enough simply to find mushrooms. They seem to believe it's necessary to destroy them if possible, perhaps to ensure that no one else will ever find anything in that spot again.
Be that as it may, mushroom picking in Czechia doesn't appear to be in decline. I ventured into the children's section of my local library in the small town of Žďár nad Sázavou. British parents might find it unusual, but without any special effort, I found not one but 4 books about mushrooms, all beautifully illustrated, and there are likely many more. Some include fairy tales about mushrooms, while others are clearly designed to teach children how to identify various types, edible, inedible, and even dangerously poisonous. Karel Šíma, anthropologist at Charles University, is probably right when he says that mushroom picking in Czechia not only has a strong past, but also a promising future.
Ta tradice je velmi silná a myslím si, že bude pokračovat. A myslím si, že je i výzvou současnosti.
The tradition is very strong and I think it will continue. And I believe it is also a challenge of our time to build on this tradition when we consider the challenges of the present and the future. It's about how we perceive our relationship with the environment, not as a utilitarian relationship between humans and nature, but as a more symmetrical, mutual relationship. And from this mutuality in these relationships, a new sense of responsibility towards the environment and the future can emerge.
Tomu životnímu prostředí a vůči budoucnosti.
That was Karel Šíma, anthropologist at Charles University, speaking about mushroom picking in Czechia. In the next episode of Czechast, I will take you to Znojmo, a town in South Moravia that feels closer to Vienna than Brno or Prague. My guide will be the deputy mayor and historian Jiří Kacetl.
I have grown up here, 48 years old, so my hometown Znojmo is my great hobby because I do a lot of courses, in history, so my lectures for general public are quite popular, I must say, so this is what keeps me going on.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Czechast. If you enjoyed it, please consider following or liking the podcast on your favorite platform. And if you know someone who's interested in Czech culture, history, or the unique perspectives of life in Czechia, be sure to tell them about Czechast. I'm Vít Pohanka, signing off for Czechast of Radio Prague International.
Czechast, a podcast in English about all things Czech. Whether you're an English-speaking expat living in Czechia and Slovakia, or a descendant of the Czechs, Moravians and Slovaks who left for a better life in America, Australia, Britain or Canada so long ago that you don't speak the language of the old country, this podcast in English is for you.